Hello, Herlighters. It's Erin Foley back in the booth talking women's sports. Oh boy, do I have a treat for you today. My guest, Dana Goldberg, fantastic stand up comic, really good friend. We've known each other for a really long time. I absolutely love her. She is the co host of the Daily Beans podcast. She's been on Last Comic Standing, TBS, ABC, just an absolute rock star. She's raised over $50 million for nonprofits across this country. She's just a stellar human being and just a huge sports fan and a huge, in particular, soccer fan. So I called her up because I saw this documentary called Copa 71, which everybody needs to see immediately. And I said, listen, we gotta talk about this documentary. So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's an incredible, incredible story, essentially about a Women's World Cup that happened in 1971 in Mexico, and it was an enormous success. And it was erased. It was erased from history. And it's an incredible story. And we're going to get to all of that. I just want to introduce what we're doing today because I'm having this kind of full circle moment. I'm recording this on Wednesday, July 10th. It'll be out the following Tuesday. And on this day, 25 years ago, the 99ers won the World Cup. And I'm flying to New York this weekend to see the U.S. women's national team play. And at halftime, we're celebrating the 99ers. 5 years ago, I watched the U.S. women's national team play in LA, and it was the 20th anniversary of the 99ers, and we celebrated with them. And I'm sitting here like having this moment like, okay, we're about to tell this crazy story of these women competing for a World Cup in 71 on the day where the 99ers changed history, changed soccer history, changed, I don't know, history for women. And on Instagram and TikTok and all the social media outlets, they've been celebrating kind of all day. And one of them was like, where were you? Do you remember where you were? And I was like, my God, of course I remember where I was. And, for me, I played soccer, but again, that was, mid early 90s. We won the World Cup in 91. We couldn't see it. We couldn't watch it. I think my earliest memories of watching, or my only memory of watching women's soccer, um, was 96 Olympics and then truly 99, which seems unfathomable to me right now. But I was living in New York City at the time. I was living with a really good friend of mine, Marty, who I, waited tables with in New York. I think I'd been in New York, maybe a couple years. And his husband was an NYU professor and was on sabbatical for the year. So we had this place, this NYU apartment, and it was massive right in the West Village. He was a writer. I was a stand-up comic. We had $1 between us, and yet we were living in like, this amazing building. Something happens with his family. He was going through a crisis. He leaves for like a month, which turned into 7 months. So I had this apartment by myself in the West Village, and it became like a sports hub. There was always people going in and out. We were watching tons of sports, Yankees, Knicks, all of it, tennis, whatever. But we all gathered to watch the 99 World Cup, and I had my sisters there. And they were like, semi interested. And then, of course, as soon as they start watching, immediately captivated. And I remember that game like it was yesterday. The buildup I had never seen. I mean, there was, before, you would say never has there been this many people, 100 was like 100 and what, 10,000, assembled for a women's soccer game. Now, cut to, which we will learn throughout this podcast, that to this day, in 1971 in Mexico City in Azteca Stadium, 120,000 people went to a women's soccer game. I just found that out, and we will get to all of that. But in 99, what was that? 28 years later, everyone's like, this is the largest number that's ever been assembled for a women's soccer game. So it's kind of blowing my mind right now. We've come like full circle. But that game was incredible. We were playing against China, of course, and losing our minds. It was just tie score, and we go into overtime. And I said, I have to get my New York Giants scarf. And I have a lucky New York Giants scarf that I was wearing when I was a kid in 91 when Scott Norwood hit the ball wide right and the Giants beat the Bills. I apologize to all the Buffalo fans. So this is like my precious giant scarf that I only take out in emergency moments. I put it around my neck, during overtime, and Christine Lilly heads it out of the goal to save us. And then we go into penalty kicks. And I just remember just being like, I can't believe I'm watching this game. It was the most exciting sporting event I had ever seen in my entire life. My sisters, who weren't even big fans, were like captivated. Got the giant scarf around my neck. I don't even remember being on the couch. I just remember being on the floor, but like rocking back and forth. Then it's the penalty kicks. And, we find out later Mia Hamm didn't even like taking penalty kicks. She got super nervous and in her head. She scores. Brianna Scurry, arguably the greatest goalkeeper of all time. She, steps to the left, boom, saves the goal. Chastain comes up, game winner, shirt off. It just changed everything. It changed everything for women's soccer, empowering, females across the globe to, I don't know, step into their power, to get more agency, to go for what they wanted. It was just one of those most amazing, magical moments. And here we are, 25 years later, still celebrating these women as we should. And yet we're about to discuss a documentary of women that were never celebrated. They won the World Cup. Like, they participated 6 different countries in a World Cup in 1971. And we are just finding out about this now. And as you will hear throughout this episode, we just keep screaming, these women need to be celebrated. So I'm just so thankful that we can celebrate the 99ers. And because of this documentary, Copa 71, and these amazing filmmakers, we are now about to be able to put these women in the history books finally, and to be able to celebrate these women as we should. And I can't wait for you to watch it. I can't wait for you to hear about it on this podcast. And Dana Goldberg is just so eloquent and just an amazing human being and such a fan. And you're going to love what she has to say. And it's such a fantastic conversation. So let's jump right in. I called you because you're a big soccer fan. We've been friends since 1912.
Yes.
We have watched soccer games together. We have watched World Cup games together. We have crashed a party for the 99ers, which we
One
did
of the
an
best
entire.
nights. And listen, people, do not take me to a party with professional soccer players without a handler. Erin can attest, if you give me 3 drinks, I will approach every single one of them, say hello, and try and get a photo.
Yeah. So that happened. And I can't remember the podcast number, but I will put that in the show notes to go back and listen to that podcast, because we describe in detail how Dana and I crashed a party celebrating celebrating the 99ers, I guess. Just
it was the 20-year, it was 5 years ago. This is crazy.
20 years. Okay. Oh my God. And now it's 25 years. Holy crap.
Yeah.
So when I heard about this documentary, the documentary we were talking about today is Copa 71. When I heard about this, I was like, I have to call Dana because she will appreciate it. She will have wonderful things to say about it. I called you before I'd even, I saw it. And now after seeing it, I really can't think of a more perfect person to discuss this. Holy crap. I will give the log line and then we'll get into it. Copa 71 tells the story of an international women's soccer tournament in 1971 that took place in Mexico and was erased from history. Filmmakers James Erskine, who did Battle of the Sexes, 2013 documentary. The guy's a rock star.
Indeed.
He's the only good man left.
I know.
And Rachel Ramsay interviewed players from 6 countries who took part, but their stories were never told. Okay, so Italy, France, England, Mexico, Denmark, Argentina. Am I being dramatic by saying that this is one of the most incredible stories, sports stories, not women's sports, not men's sports, just one of the most incredible sports stories I've ever heard of in my entire life?
Not being dramatic. I watched a documentary recently because I wanted to be fresh in my mind for the podcast. The fact that this thing was buried, if we look at society being a reflection of sport and sport being a reflection of society, it is so paralleled when you watch Copa 71 about what was going on with the women's movement. It doesn't even include the United States because we were not playing in the tournament. But it shows you what was going on in Europe and how, even through female football players, when women started to get any semblance of power, men decided to change the game, literally and figuratively ban them. So, no, you are not exaggerating. It is a phenomenal documentary. Everyone should go watch it immediately. Pause the podcast, go watch it. It's 90 minutes, and then come back and see us.
Okay, don't pause the podcast.
I was
Listen to
kidding.
the podcast and then go back and then just listen to the podcast again and then tell everyone you've ever met to listen to the podcast and watch the documentary. It was so good.
Dana,
Let's
thanks for
listen.
being our guest and for our last time you'll ever be on the show. I appreciate you coming.
Anyway, that's it. Thanks for coming on and doing the pod. All right. So we have to go into let's do some nerdy details in case it's just to break it down. FIFA, which is, in my humble opinion, the grossest, most corrupt, horrifying, um, soccer government body of literally any sport. They
Absolutely.
are. This is before I heard about this story.
Mhm.
Everybody and their brother who knows about FIFA can attest how horrifying it is. The corruption, the misogyny, all of it. We're still fighting for equal pay. The women are to this day in FIFA tournaments.
Absolutely.
So here's what happens. In 1970, there was a World Cup held in Mexico.
Men's World Cup. Yes.
Men's World Cup held in Mexico. Huge moneymaker, huge success. They wanted to build on that. So they pitched 1971 Women's World Cup, and FIFA, in full FIFA-ness, because that's a new verb, decided, oh, absolutely not. They're just flat out misogyny, flat out sexism, power grab. Says FIFA, the governing body for what was men's soccer at the time, was on a mission to block women from taking part in international football in any organized fashion. FIFA move was much about retaining power as the sport itself. So FIFA just says, absolutely not. You're not going to do this. Not on any sanctioned FIFA fields.
Which is the most brilliant part of this,
right?
Is that Mexico went fine. It's almost like what we're seeing in the WNBA, but not in the same like comparison. But like the teams now are so populated with fan base, they have to move, especially if it's like Caitlin Clark or Angel Reese, they have to move them to the larger venues. And FIFA forced that tournament out of sanctioned small arenas into 120,000 person arena, and it sold the fuck out.
There's so many parts of the story, so we're not going to go frame by frame, but that to me was an incredible part of this, right? So FIFA's like, oh hell no, right?
Right.
So this, I don't know, let's just for lack of a better term, say like Mexican Federation.
Sure.
They're like, which that's not exactly the wording, but we're going to go with Mexico Federation. They essentially say, okay, fine. Well, we're going to do it. And the two stadiums that were not, under control of FIFA were the two largest stadiums in Mexico, right?
Yeah.
So I think it was, it was Guadalajara, right? I think it was Mexico City and Guadalajara. Mexico City, obviously, still to this day, they say this is the hardest stadium to play in, Azteca Stadium, that holds, I don't know, 110 to 120, I guess. And so not only did these women's teams now kind of scramble, obviously they're, because soccer was at least banned in England until, I don't know, 1970. So there was these local kind of teams. They kind of all just kind of, grassroots these 6 countries got teams together. They go over to Mexico and they're playing
on one of the biggest pitches in the world to them, in the world period.
In the world period. So when you're watching this footage, so I listened to an interview with these filmmakers, and they said, and after this, we have to touch upon the origin story. They saying it was all archival footage. Like they weren't going to do the documentary unless they could find the footage of these games. And when you're watching, this is my first question to you. When I'm watching these games, like they were riveting games. It was really good soccer.
That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Like, if you look at the transition from sport, like where it was then and where it was now in different sports, like let's say basketball or even tennis. Like, if you look at the competitive nature back in 1970, you started to get people like, obviously Billie Jean King and all these people were
Yeah.
coming up. These soccer players, the level they're playing at is really good. It's not like they're kind of tiptoeing around the field or they're taking each
No,
other out. They're slide tackling. It's phenomenal soccer to watch. I totally agree with you. I was sort of blown away when I saw the footage. I'm like, I'm not saying that obviously there's a different level now, but these women who are probably around the same age as our players now, they could
they were
hang with some of
a
these
lot of them were
teams.
teenagers.
Yeah,
It
phenomenal. It
was,
was so cool.
yeah, I thought that was, I wasn't expecting that. I didn't even really know
Mm-mm.
what to expect. All I knew was I was going to um, be crying. And also, I knew it was coming. Like, I was going to be so angry
Yes.
and then so happy for them. It was just this absolute roller coaster of emotion. So yeah, so that was one of the most incredible parts of the story, that these countries put these teams together, no support,
Mm-mm.
just grassroots because they love to play, and then they wind up in 110,000 in front of 110,000 people. So FIFA is losing its mind, just saying this isn't sanctioned, all of this, but it is an enormous success. And I think one of the beautiful things about this documentary is they take all these players, as many, as they could get, the stars, essentially some of the stars of the team, and they
Mm-hmm.
sit them down one on one and they tell us their stories. And
50 years later.
50 years later, so here's the origin piece. The filmmakers, were asked, okay, how did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
And they said one of the producers heard a snippet on BBC radio that in England, it all started in England, that there was a 50-year reunion. So this must be in 2021. Those women had not seen each other in 50 years, which we'll talk about, the banning and the shame and all of that. And
Absolutely.
so they got together, and this producer just heard a snippet of the story on BBC radio and was like, wait, what? And that's how it began. She just heard a little snippet of the story. And then all of this was unearthed because of the research in the archives.
It was phenomenal. And the trust that was built between the movie makers and the players, that's where it started. These women were gaslit to believe that this never happened. They were told by their countries, by the federations, by the government, it never happened because there's no record of it. There's no Wikipedia page of it. There might be now because of the documentary. But before 2021, there was no online record of this Women's World Cup happening because it wasn't sanctioned by FIFA. So the movie producers and the people that made this, they talk about the trust they needed to actually have with these players because the players were afraid to talk about it. They were shunned by their country. England's team hadn't spoken to each other in 50 years. They just were told to forget it. And so when they built that trust and suddenly these women started talking, it turned into magic. 90 minutes of absolute magic.
It's the stories were so incredible. Okay, so I'm not going to remember everybody's names because there was a lot of players,
Yeah,
but a couple moments stood out. And I think the overall theme of these women just wanted to play football.
that's it.
They didn't want to compete against the men. This wasn't like, of course it was an act of defiance and female empowerment and, agency and all of it. But at the end of the day, that's not like what got them out of the bed. They just wanted to play the sport they loved. That's all they wanted to do. And so growing up, one of the stars of Mexico, and she's one of like kind of the stars of the film, her storytelling was amazing. She was just saying like she couldn't even play football. They keep saying football, so I'll just say soccer. But the whole thing, of course, is called football.
Right.
I have a problem. It's my problem. I just never say it correctly. But anyway, she was saying she was never allowed to play soccer because her father would hit her. And he would be
Yeah.
like, "You're a woman. You're not supposed to be playing soccer." And so she played in fear. And then she would sneak up on the rooftop and try to play. And so you go from these stories of like, no, there's no support, just basically like no support from even your family members to
Yeah.
play soccer. The next thing you know, She's literally playing in a World Cup.
And as it started to get support throughout the world, FIFA, those assholes, actually threatened the countries that were supporting women footballers. So that was part of the problem. FIFA, there was actually a quote which was ridiculous in the movie where they were like, they can't play. Women and men are different, physically different. For example, breasts. Literally, that's the quote from the movie.
Yeah.
Breasts, and it's dangerous to women. Like that's what they, oh, their wombs and their ovaries, and they're not going to be able to have children. And all it was fear because they were gaining support and power within their own countries. And so FIFA put a stop to it as quickly as they could.
I just, I, I am just, I'm kind of speechless at times when I was watching this movie. I was turning to Sarah because she actually, my partner Sarah, she loves sports documentaries. That's how I kind of sneak in my sports
Nice.
watching. And she just kept saying, "Wait," huh? We were both like, "Wait, what?" Like
Yeah.
to see this footage of these women bawling out like amazing athletes, getting to know some of like the stars of the game at this time. There was what is the woman Elena Schiavo from Italy? They said
Oh my
she's like
goodness.
was like the greatest player. She was the best of all of them. And in her interviews, and she's still getting so angry at the semifinal because Mexico beat Italy and they definitely should have. And it seemed like some real foul
Bad
play
calls.
with the
Oh, like with the
refs.
ref and yeah,
But
calling goals back.
she's kicking the ball in practically from like half field. I mean, these women were just incredible athletes, and they're sitting in their chairs and they're being interviewed, and you could just tell like this is when I just would get so like the emotions were so crazy because it was like this is like an opportunity of a lifetime, right? And you could tell the whole time that they were just like traumatized.
Yeah.
I'm still having trouble verbalizing how you go from playing in front of 120,000 people. Your life is irrevocably changed. You get on a plane and you go home and you're
And there's
silenced.
nothing. And that whole jarring experience, because when they were at the height of it and Mexico was making money off of this, Mexico made sure that there was a lot of press about them. When every country went to Mexico City to play the first game, they thought people were going to start attacking their buses. They got very nervous and they weren't. They were throwing gifts through the windows. And it wasn't just women, it was men and children. And it was absolutely beautiful. There's a part in the doc where the Denmark team is driving in a very old broken down bus that literally breaks down, and the Italian team goes and saves them and puts them in their air conditioned bus and gets them to the game because they know they have to play this to see who's going to be in the semifinals. It is mind blowing, the support in that stadium of 110,000 people, and they weren't just cheering for Mexico. Obviously, in that game against Italy, when things started to turn and Italy scored a goal, you could see the crowd definitely turn on Italy. But also it was national pride. Like this was happening in their country. So I don't necessarily blame them. I mean, we see a lot of that now in sport, but it was the
Yeah.
players. It was the players that continue to support each other. And I know we'll get to other parts of it. I don't want to give anything away before we get to that in the podcast episode, but it was a beautiful thing to watch. But like you said, the reason it was so jarring is they were these celebrities on a national, international scale, even in another country. And then after the World Cup, when FIFA was like, it's gone, we're banning this. I'm going to threaten England. I'm going to threaten Mexico. I'm threatening Italy. If you continue to let women play sport, you're losing finances there. You're not allowed in the stadium. We're going to take away funding. And so they stopped everything.
And as
Everything.
and as a when you're watching this, like I know that's happening, right? Because it's like the trailer of the movie. It's like, this amazing thing that happened that nobody talked about and squashed forever. So, this is coming. And
Right.
so it was such an emotional roller coaster. So let's dive into this piece of like, basically it's me, I'm sure you and everybody that watches it, trying to be happy.
Yes.
I was trying to be happy while I'm watching it, right? Because the amount of feel good stories were incredible. They said one of the rock stars from England, I think it's Carol Wilson, was saying, she said the happiest memory for me is they made a cake for us in the hotel. We were all in the same hotel as the men were in the year before. I said after they lost, I said, "You may have lost the games, but you won the hearts of the Mexican people.
Yeah.
Everywhere we went, losing or not, we were just mobbed. It was amazing to, say we had won our games and we were still revered. I'll never forget that. The bus, they traveled, they got to travel. These women had never been on a plane before, and
Right.
they got to travel throughout the whole country of Mexico, everywhere they went. Like it was it was amazing. It was so feel good, and it was just about the sport of soccer and supporting each other in the stadiums, and so there was such goodwill. I was so happy during so many parts.
And then
But in
you
the
knew it
back
was
of my
coming.
mind, I'm like, while I'm watching, I'm like, well, I keep thinking, just stay in the moment. Just
Mhm.
stay just stay in the moment before like the hammer is dropped. But it was pretty incredible to see the goodwill, how much fun these players had. And then there was this one amazing scene where when they weren't on the field, there was one shot, I don't remember the countries. It was one country watching the other countries play
Yes.
on television, which you had just alluded to. And they were saying, so it was this shot of these women watching other women play soccer on television, being blown away. This is the first time they'd ever seen women play soccer on television.
Yeah.
And you're watching this today going, oh my God. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Like trailblazers, heroes, pioneers, like every word you could possibly imagine, because none of which we'll get to, but none of this happens, what we're watching today, if it wasn't for these women.
No, and there's a massive gap because there's a gap between 1971 and 1991, where really with our history in the United States, and we're so, I don't want to say egocentric when it's that because we look at our history, there's a history outside of the United States soccer that is a national, international game, but we only know that here from when women were allowed to play, meaning when there was a national team. And I believe that was 91. And then the Olympics that followed. That's when we had our first national team. But there was a gap between what you just said, like the 71, these international women playing, when the first shot of this documentary is Brandi Chastain sitting down thinking that she's going to talk about Women's World Cup, and they show her this footage, and she's like, I'm blown away and I'm furious. Our own US women's national team did not know this tournament existed. That's how well they buried it. If you've got power in this world, you really can get rid of anything you want to. And it's a little bit terrifying. They buried this World Cup.
To me, that was one of the most explosive parts of the documentary.
Agreed.
You turn on this documentary, you're sitting down and you see Brandi Chastain, who is obviously, one of the greatest of all time. The shirt comes off in 99, changes
25
everything.
years ago. Yes.
And she is not acting. She's not an actor.
Nope.
You could, the expression on her face, she goes, "What am I watching?"
Yeah.
And they're like, it's a women's World Cup in 1971. She was like, "Wait, what?" Like, I, I'm just, this is why I think, honestly, it's one of the greatest, it's, if not like the greatest story I think I've ever seen in sports. I cannot believe, I can believe, of course, I can believe this happened, but I can't, what I keep coming back to, and I'm trying to remain positive because there was so many good moments, but I feel rage. I think
Oh,
my,
yeah.
the ultimate feeling I have is rage, because so let's just talk about rage for a second.
Okay. Can we please? We have a lot of it these days as women.
Um, it's not like they assembled a World Cup in 71 and it bombed.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
It
it's not
was,
like,
sorry,
oh,
Erin.
let's that's okay. Let's put these women out there and it's going to be a joke, and people did think it was a joke
And
at
first they
first.
did. It
Yeah.
reminded me of
Yeah.
League of Their Own, where they were
Yeah.
like, we're going to make them sexy. Look at their legs. They're beautiful women. There was a commentator that's like, these aren't masculine women. And I remember the comment, most of them are very pretty.
What is it? Line in League of Their Own, Marla Gibbs. What a hitter. And they
Yeah.
pull the camera back out.
That's basically what it was. Most of them are very pretty. But it was that thing where they knew they could start to sexualize the sport like they did
Yeah.
with women's baseball back in the day. but it's the same parallel. They have to figure out how to get men interested in this, but I don't think that they would have needed that. You have 110,000 people in Mexico that were not there to watch women's legs. They were there to watch soccer. They care about the sport, and it was hugely successful.
Yeah. So this is where the Erin Foley rage comes in. It's this sort of ironic moment where FIFA eliminates all the small fields.
Hmm.
So they have to go into the two biggest stadiums in Mexico. And so to make it profitable, the men's federation has to go all in and put so much money into it and so much advertising. So what they do essentially is invest in women's sports,
Yes.
right? So
Yep.
they invest in women's sports in 1971, put all the advertisement in, they get all these teams together, and it is a huge success. So there is your blueprint for investing in women's sports. And because it was so successful, it was banned.
Yeah.
Like
Also, it was banned, and I know we were
rage.
probably going, yeah, I don't want to jump. It was banned because two men in this documentary, it says two men went to the female soccer players in Mexico and said, "You do know they're making a killing off of watching you play. You deserve to get paid." And so the Mexican footballers were like, "Oh, wait, they're right." And so they started to push back. And then suddenly the government was like, "No, no, no, no. What do you mean you're not going to play?" They're like, "We're not going to play in the finals unless we get paid." And they were like, "No, no, no, you can't do that. Like, that's a disgrace to your country. And don't you want to do this for your country?" And they scared them enough that they convinced them to still play in the finals, and they still never got paid. And Erin, to me, in that moment, and I'm not saying those women should have pushed back and not played, because this is your dream.
Of
You're on the
course.
biggest pitch in the world. You're going to want to play in the finals at the first Women's World Cup. But I have to wonder if anything would have changed, because there is a line in the movie and it said the first step to independence is having money. And they did not want women to have more independence. So they refused to pay them, but the women still decided to play. And I think now we're starting to see that change. Like we've got soccer players that are saying we're not competing in that tournament unless we get equal pay. You've got men, male football teams saying we're not going to play until you give our women equal pay. And that is what we need more of. I hate to say it, but we
Of
do. We
course.
need male soccer players out there, footballers going, they deserve equal pay. They're bringing in as many fans as we are now. Women's soccer is the fastest growing sport in the world. You cannot deny that anymore. You just can't.
Yeah. I I felt it was so interesting because that was a part of the documentary where I did not see that coming. I thought, okay, here's how this documentary is going to go, right? The build up to the events, we're going to see them play soccer. We're going to fall in love with all these women. We're going to be so happy. Then we're going to be so enraged. Then
Yeah.
we're going to scream, has anything changed? And then we're going to see FIFA banning. And then maybe, maybe some of them there's a post story of them getting together. I
Yeah.
assumed like that was how I was going to go. So when we get to the finals, which is Mexico, Denmark, and all of a sudden this story now takes another turn where they're holed up in the hotel with, trying to assert their independence, trying to be like, no, we're not going to play. We should get paid, which I think was like the men's football team was like, you should get paid.
Yeah. There
Right.
was like
It
two
seemed like
guys
they
that
had
came to them.
support. Yeah, it seemed
Hmm.
like they had support. And I was like, wait, what? And they were holed up in I think it was like a week. It felt like they were at least 5 or 6 days in a hotel room. They could not leave the hotel. It became like a national scandal. And there was the one there was that one player, I don't
Is it
remember her
Sylvia?
name. It might have been Sylvia. She was like one of the stars.
Yeah.
And she said we wanted to get money, but we wanted to play. She
Yeah.
said we felt like we were almost being forced, to try to get money. She's like, all along, like we knew we were gonna play. So they were putting them in an impossible position, already in an impossible position. The amount of pressure, and she said, then they went out. and they felt like
They were
you know,
discombobulated.
they were discombobulated. They didn't play well. You know, they wound up losing to Denmark in the final. And then I just was like, she said, I think it was just obviously the pressure and the pressure of trying to get paid. It was just too much. It felt like it broke their spirit. I did
But
not see that
then
coming.
I 100% agree with you. And I mean, let's be honest, it's the Mexican Federation in 1970. We didn't see a lot of what was going on behind the scenes. There could have been a
God
like,
knows.
if you don't play, your family's going
Well,
to disappear. We don't
yeah.
know. We don't know what
Who
would have happened.
knows?
Who
Yeah.
knows? No one ever does that. But one of the most beautiful things that happened after the finals when Mexico lost, and you know if you've seen this documentary because your heart sort of stops as well. When Mexico lost against Denmark, the stadium of 110,000 people didn't move. They went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. No one left. And then all of a sudden, there was a wave of applause and standing ovation because they knew what these women had done. And that's one of the biggest things. The people were there, the
Yeah.
people supported. It was the government in FIFA that took this away from them. The American public, same thing now. We have the fan base. It's the people in power that are saying, oh, women's sports doesn't make enough money. And there's other people saying no one watches women's sports. Yes, they do. The numbers there and they prove it. And the numbers were there in 1971 on an international scale that the audience was there. It was the people in power, white men that didn't want women to gain more control in society. And that's what happened.
What I cannot get my head around is like the threatening of them, don't tell the story, the bullying, the gaslighting. One of Carol Wilson, English superstar, she goes to some event, some football event, and they ask her to go on stage, and she's telling the story. Then they make fun of her. She
Yeah,
sits
and
back
yeah,
down and says she never played soccer ever again after that moment. The shaming, they all felt shame. That's what we need to talk about. Like
yeah.
that. How do you make someone feel so bad after doing something so incredible? That's what's
It,
really hard for me to really comprehend.
it is. And if you want to go on to a bigger level, sure, I can understand how the women stopped talking about it. Erin, there were photographers, there were videographers, there was 110,000 people in the stadium. How did they get all of these people to somehow bury the footage? FIFA must have had to have found every photographer, every videographer, and said, hand over everything you documented. We're locking it up, we're burying it. It's never going to be seen by the light of day. How? Like that immense power is mind blowing to me. And the sadness behind these women, and one of the most beautiful scenes at the end is these women who played 50 years ago sitting in stadiums watching their current teams compete openly, proudly, supported by their country in the World Cup, in the Olympics. And you have these women in the stands screaming and cheering, and they're just blown away that the youth of today, when I say youth, I mean obviously, from 18 to however old or even younger now, 16-year-olds on the pitch, they're allowed to and celebrated and supported. Maybe not to the extent we would like them to be, but if you compare it to where they were 50 years ago, it's astounding.
It's incredible. Also, in the London Film Festival, one of the debuts of the documentary, they brought all the team together with their families and they saw the story for the first time on the big screen. I was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
waterworks,
Tears.
like just
Absolutely.
unbelievable. Because yeah, to me, that the piece of the shaming and the gaslight and the bearing of the story, it begs the question, like, was it worth it? Like,
That's a good.
what, you know what I mean? Like, w- did enough good come from it to yes, of course you can make the argument, yes, but it's just so appalling that these women were just, it's not a dramatic word, they were traumatized. That to me was the most alarming and the most shocking of the documentary, that they could do something on such a scale and prove themselves in amazing soccer and all the feel good and all the fans and the goodwill, and then it gets turned
Stripped away.
against them.
Yeah. It's a good question. Is it worth it? Brandy, just to go full circle in it, Brandy Chastain at the end of the documentary is basically now when youth and people come to her and say, "Oh my God, you were groundbreaking for me. You're the reason I blah blah blah." Brandy now can look at them and wouldn't have been able to do this before she was introduced to this documentary. She can look at them and say, "I have some other women to tell you about." So that having their stories be carried
Yeah.
on now, and I know 50 years later, it just seems really, really unfortunate, but at least their names, and most of these women are still alive.
Yeah.
That whole saying is you're not forgotten unless someone stops speaking your name. Now, these women and their history and their story is going to be carried on through generations of storytells through football and, as we call it, soccer in the United States. So I have to hope that makes it all worth it now, even if it didn't feel like it was over the last 50 years. That would be my hope. And if you see the interview with these women, you can see the fire in their eyes still, all these
Oh,
memories of their
yes.
stories. They're back on that pitch. They can smell it. They can hear the crowd. They can feel, the ball at their cleat. I mean, it is just an absolutely beautiful documentary in the way it was done. So not to drone on, but I think that now that we can carry their names on into the history of the sport and we didn't know them before, it's sort of like the Negro League,
Yeah.
baseball players, that the records are now being put into history, and they should be, because Black history is American history. This history in soccer should always have been part of the story. And so it's nice to know that it's there now.
Oh, absolutely. That's so well said. I mean, the good thing is now all those women that were shamed and gaslit and bullied, they can reclaim their story. Now
Yes.
their story can be shared in the most positive, amazing, they can be championed, they can be celebrated. This film, obviously, it made me it made me lose my mind with rage,
Of
but it's
course.
a at the end of the day, I was like, this is a celebration of what these women did. If
Yeah.
it wasn't for 71, everyone thinks, okay, the first FIFA sanctioned World Cup was 91. However, I've spoken to a couple of women that we met at that party that night. Ruth Harker, one of the
Yes.
original goalkeepers, they had a ragtag team in 85, 86, 80. Like they had the first semblance of a women's national team in the late 80s before 91. I
Right.
didn't even know 91 existed
Nope.
until honestly, probably, I guess, the Olympics in 96. And
Yeah.
then really 99.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's incredible. So I do feel like at the end of it, um, these women now can sit there and look at what they did and finally, because of course they felt good about it the whole time, but then everything was shut down. So now it feels like they can be truly celebrated.
I mean, if you think about history, and listen, I know I don't want to get political, but we're talking about women in
Yeah.
history here. Think about like World War II. All the men went off to war. The women learned how to do the skills. They were keeping society running. They had all of these trades that they were learning. They had all of these things that they could have taken in, started making money, and started gaining progress in our society. And you know what I mean? They started moving up, and then all the men came back from war, and the women went back into the houses and they went back into the kitchen. It seems like in our country, and we're seeing it now, as women start to get power, whether it's sport or bodily autonomy or politics, that it threatens the very straight white patriarchy in our society, and they find a way to squash it. But I'm hoping as history grows, there's more of us. We don't stand down. We continue to fight so that, you've got people like Caitlin Clark, women's basketball has always been enjoyable to watch. Why it took Caitlin, there's a lot of conversation to go around that, because there has been an incredible amount of women's basketball players that didn't happen to be white before her, that it just didn't happen. It didn't happen yet. And it was the same thing with the soccer. When we had our 91 team, it didn't happen yet. I remember the documentary with the 99ers. Do you remember what changed? Because something changed in this country with women's soccer with the 99ers that just didn't catch fire with the previous teams. Do you remember the story when the 99ers were on the way to the World Cup and they were like, we're going to be late. We're stuck in traffic.
And it was their
Like, what the
traffic.
fuck is going on? And the guys looked at them and they're like, this is for you guys. Something happened when they knew the US was going to go to the finals of the World Cup. that 100,000 tickets sold in 24 hours and the Rose Bowl sold out. And then everything started to shift. It's just, it comes in waves. And I'm hoping that we're at a place in our society that the women are just not going to, let their futures be documented and decided by men in power. And that
Yeah.
goes back into sport. It starts in sport.
It's an absolute culture. I mean, sports shape culture.
Absolutely.
But 99, here's a counterpoint. Obviously, it changed everything in an amazing way. But it's also so infuriating because I'm in a mood today.
Yeah.
Believe me, it's all positive. But I guess what it is underneath all of this, I get so frustrated and so angry because it could have happened so much sooner, right?
Yeah.
I think really at the end of the day, that's what I always go back to. 71 meant, well, we could have had a 75 and a 79 and an 83 and you know what I mean? Like, so that to me, we wait 20 years for another, now the first sanctioned World Cup. But in 99, all that goodwill and oh my God, this is going to change everything. And believe me, it led to so many changes. It should have led to an incredibly immediate, successful domestic league.
It
And
did.
it didn't.
Right.
It did
It should
not.
have.
And it wasn't just the Rose Bowl that was sold out. All the other stadiums they went to along the way, packed to the rafters.
Yeah.
You know, I think they were in Giant Stadium, one of the first games. And they were like, oh, who's playing here? You know, like it was same like the reaction stadium to stadium, goodwill throughout this entire country. But again, you can have this highest of high moment, but if it is not supported and invested in by US soccer, you know, the domestic league was opened, it closed, it opened, it closed. And now I still have these moments with the NWSL, right? We've got a second league coming up that's going to be essentially
A
in the
feeder?
fall. They say it's a feeder, but I don't know if it's going to be a feeder. It's still taking shape. My first reaction should have been, oh, this is great. More opportunities for women to play soccer, which of course it is. However, because of all the history that we're seeing, obviously, with the biggest example right now of the Copa 71, I go, oh God, don't water down the NWSL because,
Right.
we still have tipping
We're
points,
still building.
Orlando is the number one team in our league, barely attended. They're just
Yeah.
not that well attended, right? So I just get these moments where now I'm going to call them Copa 71 moments where I go, oh, we're
Yeah.
always seem to be fighting and fighting this uphill battle to get women supported and invested in. Is it getting better? Absolutely.
I think it's getting better, and I do have to take the WNBA because it's not, and I want to make a clarification for those listening. The reason I use Caitlin Clark is just because there was something that started obviously with the record she broke at Iowa, but the thing is that now everyone's watching. Everyone, the stadiums are being sold out. It's Camila Cordoza, it's Angel Reese, it's all of these rookies that are coming in and people are excited to watch, and it's the veterans. It's all of these incredible people. And my hope is, because right now there's so much money going into it, finally there's more money going into it, but a lot of things need to change even within the WNBA and the power within there because the players aren't getting paid enough. I'm hoping that'll start to shift into women's soccer because even though they're filling the stadiums, for the WNBA and the arenas. When you look at some of the games, like in New York now, because they won the national champion in the NWSL last year, or you look at Angel City, which is a very different formation of a team. And you know that the people that bought the team decided we're going to do this differently. And now that team is being sold, at least the article I saw, for $250 million. There is change happening within the NWSL. It's not happening as fast as I would like, but I have to hope that some of this other support of women's sports like basketball and the WNBA is going to start like seeping into the NWSL, and hopefully those professional players will start to get the respect and pay that they deserve. There's got to be a trickle down here. I just don't believe that it's special to basketball. I can't.
No, I mean, honestly, in the last couple of years, the NWSL has been invested in. And
Yeah.
so it's thriving. It is at its best than it's ever been, which is amazing. There's just always that little voice in the back of my head that's like, "Oh, okay,
Yeah. Let's not fuck
just
it up. Don't
let's
fuck.
not put this is the third iteration." But
Yeah.
what I'm hoping, I think basketball slingshot, and it's so crazy how everyone's like, this year, the numbers in 2023, which I've probably said on this podcast ad nauseum, were
Hmm.
the highest it's ever been. Right.
Yeah.
So you don't get the highest it's ever been and then just it has been building and building and building and building and
Right.
building. You go back and you watch the Houston Rockets win in 97, 98, 99. It is some of the most incredible basketball I've ever seen. It has been incredible basketball. I've watched it since day one, the whole time. But
Yeah.
now social media and NIL deals, and now you get to know these players and Clark and Reese, and it's so exciting. Well on its way.
Yeah.
Soccer, I feel like we're good.
Yeah.
What my hope is, now let's tackle softball. Now let's tackle volleyball,
Yeah.
because the play is incredible, and
What's
now,
interesting? Oh,
yeah, I was just
no,
gonna
go
say
ahead.
next year with Athletes Unlimited, we're gonna get more of a traditional softball league. I'm literally tonight headed down to Long Beach to see our U.S. national team volleyball team play. It's going to be sold out. It's in their first professional league is in the fall. So I'm really hoping we get all of it on board and elevated.
No, I agree with you. This documentary, I love that Serena and Venus Williams are the executive producers, two of them that helped make this happen. That's what we need. We need women who have had success, both financially and stardom, start to unearth these stories, start to fund them, put them out there so that people know the history of this. There is so much that they could do with people that have done really well financially. Money talks, money is power in our society, and it is power in sport. And if enough people will start investing in women, it's not like they're not there. There's elite athletes all over the place that haven't necessarily had the opportunity or the support they needed to become Olympic athletes or to be able to participate on the highest levels of sport in the NWSL. Part of it has to do with privilege. It does, and this hierarchy in the country, and it funnels down to other minorities as well, not just women. You can see it, but then you can also see in sport, like the best tennis players in the world are black tennis players, black female tennis players. Like things have changed so much in the
Yeah.
last 50 years in the most beautiful ways. And I have to believe it's going to continue to grow, but we are in control of that more than ever right now. We have to be loud. We have to support. We have to push back when someone's pushing up against this. And we know who usually is pushing up against this, people who fear losing power. But we have the ground beneath us right now, and we just have to keep going. We do.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so, listen, I had this podcast 10 years ago where I was like trying to figure out, as much, trying to cover as many women's sports as possible. I couldn't find enough,
Right.
like they were there collegiately, but they weren't even fucking televised,
Right.
So now look where it's come just in 10 years where I feel like it's absolutely exploding. And I just had this thought while you were talking about building and building and building is there's no way FIFA in 91 sanctions a World Cup without having the memory of how well they did in 71.
Agreed.
So these women, first of all, I feel like there should just be national parades.
Yeah.
In all of those countries, in those six countries,
I want ticket parades. Let's go.
they should have ticket tape parades. They should not pay for anything for the rest of their lives. And then like all, that was one thought I had. I just feel like these women need to be celebrated for the rest of their life. I'm going to hunt them all down and get them on the podcast. And there'll be an interpreter. But another thing that popped into my mind when you're speaking is now all these athletes, like you've got Sue Bird and Rapinoe and Abby Wambach, and Alex Morgan was also a producer of this film.
Yeah.
They have money, right?
Yep.
And now they have production companies. Now they
Yep.
have Together X and Ari Inc. and all of this stuff. And now Serena's got huge companies, and then her husband Alexis obviously has been an amazing benefactor for women's sports. So now it feels like, okay, now they have the money, they have more power, and look at what they're starting to produce.
Right.
This is probably the third or fourth documentary in the last couple months that have been mind-blowing documentaries about women's sports. So it is absolutely exciting. Any last moments of the film that we didn't cover?
Um, I don't think so. I think we got into it. I mean, it was just personally, I want to know if the two people that kept interviewing together are lovers and they've been happily married for 50 years. Like those are the things I think about, like the two Dutch players. I'm like, are they friends? Are they roommates? What's happening here? I need answers. It was wonderful. These women are wonderful, and their memory of this experience, at least for the most part, seems so positive, and they were really proud of what they did, regardless of how it turned out, regardless of the fact that it got buried. Now that they can talk about it, I think this documentary has freed their spirits in so many ways that it's not just getting the story of Copa 71 out, it's getting the stories of all of these women that were silenced for 50 years, their voice back. It's giving them their voice back. And that alone is such a beautiful gift for them. You can just see them light up. I want to know every single one of them too.
A huge thanks to Dana watching the film, being so wonderful and so well spoken. And I'm glad that she kept pulling me out of despair and rage and reminding him of all the positive things that happened. I tend to sometimes get so aggravated and so, oh God, just overly just frustrated at the amount of time and how these women weren't celebrated. But again, full circle moment. Everybody watch this film so you can know these women, and for them to be finally celebrated in an epic level, and for them to see themselves on the big screen and relive that amazing moment in their life. Okay, time for feel good moment of the week. We got a good one. Jessica Campbell, the first woman to coach in the NHL. She just became the assistant coach of the Seattle Kraken. I mean, this is huge. Women being part of, like, a male dominated league is absolutely incredible. Let's just do a deep dive on Jessica Campbell. Okay, so she's Canadian, a phenomenal player, right? She played for over a decade, Canadian national team, domestic leagues. She played over in Sweden. She played at Cornell for 4 years. So she's an incredible player her whole life. Then in 2022, which is a mere 2 years ago, started coaching in the minor leagues of the Seattle organization. 2 years later, she's promoted to the big leagues. Just an incredible feat. I mean, there's no other woman coaching in the NHL, which is kind of mind-blowing. But her comments, of course, are just so inspiring and such a class act. She said, "I'm humbled, obviously, to be in this position. You speak to the word first to be the first, but that's never really where my focus is. It's always on the work. It's on the impact. It's on the job. There's a lot to this game and to this job. And so I've never taken it for granted. Though I'm honored to be the first, I don't want to be the only one. And honestly, I don't feel like I'm the only one in this organization. There's a long list of incredible women that are doing phenomenal jobs here in management, scouting, player development. I'm just excited to do my part now behind the bench." Okay, this is the mic drop moment. She said she wasn't sure how it would happen, but she also intrinsically believed it to be a possibility to reach this level. And she did it. Holy crap. I think that's what it takes, right? Obviously, hard work and skill, but it takes a belief. And I feel like that's what it is. For the 99ers, they believed. For the women in Copa 71, they believed. And it's so inspiring. Full circle moments here on Her Lights. But Jessica Campbell, holy crap. Congratulations. Super feel good. Now, obviously, I have to cheer for the Seattle Kraken, and I have no problem doing that. Obviously, I'm a Ranger fan because I'm from New York, but I tell you what, in second place right now, Seattle Kraken. A huge congratulations to Jessica Campbell. So feel good, so kick ass. This whole episode was just literally just female empowerment, trailblazers, pioneer, and now we can add her to the list. So freaking cool. That is our episode. Fans, friends, family, have the best week of your life.